Perfect. Okay, so thank you so much for introducing all of yourselves. Looks like we are going to, I think everything is good on the tech side, so we're good to go. That means that we get to get started with our questions. So, um, yeah, let's just start with the fact that we're in the middle of a legislative session. And so this session, we have seen Democratic lawmakers take the lead on introducing House Bill 4002, which recriminalizes the small possession of drugs, a policy that we know voters overwhelmingly disagree with through the passage and approval of Measure 110 that Devin talked about earlier. Today it is with great sadness. I know some of us were in the Capitol, as others were watching virtually, but we saw that House Bill 4002 did pass off the floor with bipartisan support. And we know that the effects of this bill will be devastating for Black and Brown communities, and particularly Black communities who are already targeted and arrested by police at a rate 4.3 times higher than white people. Can you help us understand the political landscape of why we have come back again to a place where we are institutionalizing white supremacist practices and policies? And I'll open it up to anyone who wants to pop in.
Well, I can jump in. I think it's important to keep in mind that, let's jump back to the George Floyd protests in 2020, right? So people are coming together, they're demanding change, they're demanding an end to police brutality, they're demanding a better use of our resources towards better things than police, because it's not a very good investment. They're challenging systemic racism. It's a really powerful time. And it really shook up the people that were in charge, the people that were comfortable with the way things are, the people that benefit from the status quo. And so this fear and this discomfort led to a backlash, especially from business interests, police, and the politicians that, basically work for the business interests and the police. And so they saw these demands for justice as a threat to their power and their way of life. And this happens all the time. This is not a new thing at all. There's even a term for it. They call it white lash. So whenever marginalized communities, specifically Black communities, stand up for their rights and makes any headway, there's just like counter reaction. And it's just a pattern we've seen through history. Like, it happened in the Reconstruction era after the abolition of slavery. It happened like the early 20th century. It happened in the civil rights movement. It's something that happens every time we make any headway. So, keeping that in mind, the protests happen and all these things change. We get the charter reform bill, we get Measure 110, we get the Police Accountability Commission, we get all these things that just have them like shaking in their boots. Like, they know that the way that they have run things is coming to an end, right? So they're like, all right, I gotta do whatever I can to just burn everything down, just sabotage it all, And I feel like the interest really put a focus on Measure 110. I mean, the police had a work stoppage. Not that the police aren't particularly effective. Like, normally I'd be like, whatever, I don't care that they had a work stoppage, because they can't, they're not very good at the jobs anyways, right? So it doesn't make that big of a difference. But I think it's more important to think about the fact that they're actively making houseless people's lives a living hell. Like, they're doing a work stoppage except for constant sweeping. And so they're doing all this constant sweeping. It's taking away people's small shelters that they have. And, I mean, when you're in a place where like really bad things are happening, people turn to things to cope, and your tent's taken away, everything you own is taken away, and all you have is whatever was on you. And oftentimes whatever that thing, it could be some drugs. So, people are using out in the open, and it's not related to Measure 110. It's actually related to our houseless crisis. And so all that keeping in mind, the politicians are feeling nervous. They're like, the people aren't happy. And the business interests and the police rile up all the suburban reactionaries that are saying, like, my children are viewing drug use downtown. It's horrendous. Think about the children and all that. And so they basically blame everything on Measure 110, and with the idea that, like, all of what we're seeing is the result of decriminalization, even though the science tells us that's not the case at all. There's a rising drug fentanyl crisis around the country that just hit. We're actually a little bit late. It's been going on in the US for a while. It just hit Oregon. There's a houseless crisis. There's all these crises happening at once. And people in power, are using that as an opportunity, like all these crises, to roll back some of the really amazing reforms that we made, like in 2020 and after that. Yeah, I've rambled on long enough. So if anyone else wants to hop in.
Can I piggyback back off that? Um, so in Oregon, we used to have non-unanimous juries. So, unanimity requires all 12 jurors. In Oregon, it was just 10 to convict. And there's like very clear racist history for that. In 2020, there was a landmark US Supreme Court case that said, hey, that's not constitutional. And the only two states that had that were Oregon and frickin' Louisiana. Um, so that came in 2020. Then there's been case law coming out that has um, limited the cops' ability to stop folks. And from a criminal defense perspective, I obviously think it's going in the right direction. Before, they would just not need a warrant if someone was in a car, but now they can call in for warrants. So they should be calling in for warrants. So, I think maybe law enforcement, they're going to use this rhetoric of like, oh, we're losing our toys or our tools. And in 2021, there was a case relating to drug delivery, and it's addressed in the bill. Um, and so that kind of limited it again. So I feel like there's, pushback from the status quo of like, oh my gosh, things are changing, things are shifting. We're losing our tools, we're losing our power. I'll also point out that community corrections, so like probation officers, they're they get funding based on how many like people their caseload, and their caseload shrunk, so their funding shrunk. Um, and so some people might have been out of a job, but they were still kept on. I think when you talk to most like public defenders, they would say we would love to work our way out of a job, but I don't think the people in the prison industrial probation complex want to be worked out of the job. And I also think about a conversation we had about prisons closing, and they don't want to close prisons, but you're doing that on the backs of low-income folks and people of color. So just thinking more about that and the pushback against this power dynamic.
Go ahead and hop in. I think there's a couple of other things that are happening, like all of that, plus one to everything that was just shared. And when I'm really thinking about this political landscape and what is happening right now, there's a few things that have become very evident. Folks are terrified when it comes to their elections that are coming up in November. And what we're seeing is that politics are actually leading policy, right? So the lack of investment that's happened over many years, not just since Measure 110, we have declared states of emergency around the drugs in general and houselessness multiple times over the last couple of years, let alone the last couple of decades. No critical investments were actually made during that time. So we're really seeing all of these things kind of come into this moment and get really, really large. I think the other part of all of this to keep in mind is that we've never really left white supremacist practices and policies. If we had, this bill 4002 would have been put together in a very different way than it was. They centered the carceral system every single step of the way and kept communities of color as far away from the creation of this as possible, which is in and of itself like pretty crystal clear white supremacy. And then there's also a general thing that I think we just have to face as a community. Accountability and punishment are not the same thing. And we are trying to tie those two things together and use punishment, so the carceral system, as opposed to this idea of community accountability. And we're going to keep going in these circles until we make that commitment to ourselves and each other.
Absolutely, Danita. I think everybody said it really, really well. I think if I can just briefly add, several representatives actually clearly stated it during the committee vote yesterday and then during the floor vote today, and that is this fear of this ballot measure. And so really, and it's hard because we really expect that in practice, House Bill 4002 won't actually be so much more different than the regressive, harsh policies pushed by the so-called fix and improve ballot measure 110 of interest group, which is actually led by the former head of Oregon prisons and funded by billionaires. And so I think it's unfortunate, but it's horrible, actually, not just unfortunate, but state lawmakers should not really have allowed themselves to be extorted into sacrificing Black and brown lives to pay off these corporate special interest. And that's the political dynamic of everything that what my colleagues have said, but that's really at the center of what we've heard so much as option. Inaction is not an option, but at the cost of whom?
Mm. Yep. At the cost of whom? Yeah. I think that is, we've seen this session unfold, and that fear-based mindset, and letting that just control and push us. I would say back into history, but I also really appreciated you calling out to that. We've never left this centering of white supremacy in the way that we work. Otherwise, House Bill 4002 would have been built differently. So, yeah, thank you so much for all of those answers. I'm going to scooch us along to another question. And it's essentially about why House Bill 4002 will fail. Right. So we've been talking a bit about House Bill 4002, which is going through the Oregon legislature as we speak, and will likely pass. Can you give us additional details on what the bill does and why it will ultimately fail at keeping our communities safe? What are some real and proven solutions that we know would actually work to address our addiction crisis? And I liked how you were all like raising your hand and then respecting who raised their hand first. So if you want to do that, that would be super cute.
I think any panelists can speak to this about the like criminalization portions. So just in like super brief, high level, when DAs and law enforcement get into a room and write a bill to like try to address substance use disorder and try to appear empathetic, you get everything shoved through the only system that they know, which is the criminal legal system. Possession of a controlled substance, and can I just really quickly say, these are the decriminalized amounts. So just orienting us, that's 1 gram or less of heroin and fentanyl, and 2 grams or less of cocaine and meth. So we're talking about those amounts. They will now be kind of like the equivalent of a B misdemeanor, but it's an unclassified misdemeanor. Hopefully, for counties that adopt deflection programs and it's functioning well, I guess ideally it would be law enforcement encounters person says, hey, I can take you to jail, or you can do deflection and charges won't be pursued. So they can go the deflection route. But there are 13 counties that aren't going to adopt deflection programs or haven't yet. So what happens at those counties? They, I think, would just go straight to jail. Charges would be filed against that person. When that person appears before a judge, they would get sentenced to probation. And I guess the proponents are saying that there's all these off ramps. So the person gets probation. If there's a violation of probation and they go back to jail, they can leave jail if there's treatment. And there's like something called conditional discharge and probation. So there's like these options, but it's all through like probation, jail sanctions. And we all know that addiction is, sometimes a response to childhood trauma and just trauma and generational trauma. And addiction is a response to pain. So what they're imposing is like more trauma and more pain by using the jail system. And we know that people die in jail all the time. It's a really terrible place for people who are mentally ill and suffering from substance use disorder. So I guess one of the reasons why we think it's going to fail is that there's no public defenders. There's just no public defenders to meet the charges that are being filed by prosecutors. So most of these folks are going to go on an unrepresented list and wait 18 to 36 months for an attorney. So they're not going to get that help right away. And there's so many problems with probation officers, have to track what treatment's available. Is treatment going to be available? Arrange for the person to get out. But again, I just want to go back to like, they're using jail as a punishment for someone who's in a lot of pain.
Yeah, absolutely, Maylee. I think one of the things that this bill is doing is creating this catch and release cycle that'll just be perpetuated. Maylee spoke really to the need for more public defenders, but really our whole criminal system is flawed. Let's say that we thought that the criminal legal system was the pathway to it. It's so under-resourced and underfunded in the first place. Like every branch of the public defense system is under-resourced. You have circumstances like Klamath County District's offices that was staffed by the DOJ for nearly a year because they could not recruit DAs. You had Lane County DA's office who decided to not charge misdemeanors because they didn't have enough DAs. You have a state lab issue that has 4 to 6 months delays. Right? This is delaying the justice for folks that have actually cases. It's delaying their process and justice for those that have been victims of crimes. You have jail staff that is so short that they cannot operate at full capacity. What is this doing? This is breaking those civil rights that they have of folks that are incarcerated. You have judicial clerks who are short in the Multnomah County, so they cannot operate as many courtrooms as they have judges. So let's say that this is an optimal plan. It's so under-resourced and underfunded, and it's so costly. The fiscal on this bill was just posted yesterday, and we need to be very suspicious of that number because it's a very low number. And honestly, for political reasons, folks are saying we need to pass. So let's put that number a little small. We can come back next year. We'll come back after that, and we should be looking out for some astronomical figures on there. When all of this could have been used to actually put money in funding for real solutions, for housing, for treatment services, for drug addiction services, all of the things that we know are the root causes based on evidence-based. So this is why it's not going to work. Not only is the system that they created flawed and it's a catch and release, but even if it was a perfect system, it's under-resourced and underfunded.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, this system is really creating a new and expensive bureaucracy across the state. And access to treatment services will ultimately depend on the whim of local police and prosecutors, which means that ultimately you're giving police and prosecutors not actual health providers, actual experts, actual medical professionals. You're not putting the right people in charge. You're not giving the right people the authority to determine who gets treatment services and who doesn't. And fundamentally, addiction is a public health issue, and it should be treated like one. And when we give when we give that kind of authority to police and prosecutors to make health decisions, people die. Because the criminal legal system is a necrophilic institution. It leads towards death. It leads towards shorter life. It leads towards the social determinants of health, not being reached. And so it's really distressing for me to think about, with police, it's one of those things where it's like when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so when you're a police officer, every answer is criminalize people. And ultimately, people are literally going to die because there's plenty of evidence that shows that, when people are arrested and go to jail, like they often overdose right when they get out because their tolerance has gone slightly down, but they just do the same amount. And so there's a huge percentage of people that die from overdose after getting out of jail. So this is the risk here.
I think everyone has spoken to this incredibly well. There's a lot of flaws in this bill. One of the things that really stands out to me in the way that it's going to impact our community, specifically the Black and Brown community, is that it essentially creates a stop and frisk program. It allows cops to get into your pockets because they presume or have reason to presume that you have something in your pocket for them to find. They don't have to see it. It's an assumption. They can assume that this is something that you have, and then they're able to harass our communities. You connect that with the enhanced penalties for dealing around specific community spaces, and we've got a recipe for over policing and an overall disaster. I anticipate that this is going to be used exactly how they intend to use it, and that we being the Black community, are going to be targeted through this. The racial impact statement has said as much, and they use numbers that are also suspect. They are incredibly low. I expect that it is going to be much higher than that, and that in and of itself is going to be a flaw in this overall plan. And I just want to remind folks that Kropf on the floor today and during the hearing yesterday stated multiple times that he will be ensuring the fact that there will not be disproportionate racial impacts out of this bill. He cannot do that. He will not do that. And if there was an interest in doing it, they would have done it before they passed something like this. So I just, want to put that out on the record as well.
May I add one thing about stop and frisk? There's language in the bill that says you can enter something called conditional discharge in the hopes that you will get your charge dismissed when you complete probation. And so you can enter it within 30 days, but you have to give up kind of like your right to file a motion to suppress evidence. And I just want to bring that up because there's a lot of like law enforcement and kind of like covering their tracks and DAs covering their tracks, and this is one of them. So again, person is placed in a situation where you have 30 days to enter, and proponents will be like, oh yeah, we're gonna get them right in the best time and they'll get into treatment right away. They're just entering probation and maybe they'll get treatment. But you give up your right to file motions to suppress evidence, and we know that PCS cases, the possession cases, are all about searches. That's what it's all about. It's all about searches. So we're not going to be able to like bring to light all the bad police searches and develop case law based on that, because some people may choose just the quicker and easier route, and that's how they structure these things.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, mainly these targeted enforcements that are that we know is going to have disparate enforcement and disparate impacts on Black and Brown communities. One, the data on this is not being tracked. These frisk-like tactics, there's no data on it. So when representatives are saying we will keep an eye on this, there's no actual data by the bill that is tracking this to keep an eye on it. That wasn't written in its format. And two is that we have heard that there's commitment from these counties to do deflection programs, but we have also openly heard from law enforcement that they don't believe in deflection programs. And if you're giving law enforcement the decision of whether to enforce or not deflection programs, like what we see is that when law enforcement is resistant in the first place, that's communicated. That's been communicated so many times, and that they do not have the buy-in, that will have that implicit bias, and they will always harm Black, Brown, Indigenous, and the most vulnerable communities, individuals in our communities. So I wanted to uplift that. With that, we also need a culture shift in law enforcement, right? For example, in a 30-month period after the Measure 110 law enforcement in Washington County, they only issued 71 violations for possession. Whereas the 24 months preceding Measure 110, they arrested over 2,400 people for possession. That is 30 more times as many. What does that tell you? That law enforcement sees drug and substance use disorder as a punitive issue, not a healthcare issue. When you're putting forward recriminalization and something that's going to use the criminal system, that is centering what you're valuing. And that's punitive measures, not healthcare. And when you say that you're going to do deflection before jail, probation before jail, conditional discharge before jail, those are all fallacies the moment you make deflection optional. So just, it's really frustrating the way that this has been put out in the media and the way that these representatives has put it out as to be like, we have found this great solution and we have heard all the stakeholders and this is what's been done. They're complete fallacies. They're false promises.
Gosh, this room is just full of such good big brains, and I'm so glad that we're here today to talk about these different all the different components of what is currently happening with this bill and the state of Oregon and the state of our country. So The next question that I would like to ask is honestly asking for you all to share for the folks that we have in the room and also on our live stream. If you could share some of the stories that people are telling, so it could be lawmakers, it could be people in community, etc., that people are telling to understand, explain, and or make sense of drug criminalization as the right next step, and mass incarceration, aka the war on drugs.
I can jump in. If anyone was at the hearing on, I think what day is it? The days are running together. Tuesday. I think it was Tuesday. Oh no, Monday. No, actually Wednesday. Sorry. It was one of those days. But one thing that came up probably like half a dozen times was this idea of nudge from a judge, and that you can nudge, like this idea that like criminalizing things nudges people to make better choices. And of course, the police paraded, some, former, some people in recovery, and, had them tell their stories, and their story was really, it was really important. And I'm so glad that, that they're able to get where they are today. And for every person that is, cleaning up their life after getting, scared straight with jail, there's many more people that die, whose opportunities dry up, who get evicted from their houses, all these other things that happen when people go to jail. So, they're showing the story over and over again of folks who got clean because they went to jail, they went into a diversion program, and oftentimes after they finished the diversion program, they would become mentors and help other people that were also going through this diversion program. And on the one hand, I love the idea of, well, they say the last stage of recovery is like advocacy, right? Like once there's no final point to healing, but as you're healing, as you're getting better, as you're recovering, you start to get strong enough to want to help other people that are just maybe 2 steps behind you. And I really commend them for that. And also, I wish they weren't doing it through the criminal justice system. I wish that, that it was through like a community program, because like I said, for every person that gets a nudge with a judge that has a good outcome, there's many more that have really, really bad outcomes.
Now, this question with this one's a little bit of a challenge. I think that there's a reality that for the folks that have come in to share stories that are, like Jay just said, a nudge from a judge, there's a lot of emotion that's tied to this. It is an issue that touches everyone. I don't know anyone that hasn't been touched by addiction or the war on drugs, right? That's just a real reality that we are in. And a lot of folks are advocating to save the life of someone they've already lost. And that is such a hard reality. And honestly, I'm doing the same thing. Right. So yeah, I think really sitting in that acknowledgement is a lot. And the way in which it is being done, there's a phrase for that, but there's a way in which it's being done that's allowing people to mass consume trauma, which is unnecessary, and it is being used in ways that feel very nefarious and are trying to move people, manipulate emotions into a particular direction that's like, hey, look, if the person I lost were stopped one more time by the cop, then that wouldn't have happened. And I think that's a part of our grieving process, but that is also not entirely true, right? And so it's been really fascinating to watch the way, especially with folks that are a part of oppressive systems, cops in particular, DAs in particular, who have manipulated those stories, those feelings, in trying to move this policy that, again, is trying to save someone that we've already lost into a space that erases the harm that it will do and focuses on saving these other folks.
Yeah, and well, if other folks want to jump in, feel free to raise your hand. But yeah, no, hearing all of those folks talk about a nudge from the judge, and then finally hearing someone call it a trail to jail, I was like, that's much more accurate. And Danita, to your piece about all these people bringing in their stories and thinking that jail is the solution, as like the blanket solution rather than an exception to the rule. Because yes, there are definitely folks that have been successful through some of these programs, but I don't believe that they are the rule. I believe that they're the exception. I'll pass it to you, Jessica.
Yeah, I think on that point, Elona, I think a lot of the experiences that I heard on that really come from a time where jail was the only option. So when jail is the only option, you can expect that there will be some success stories. But it's again going back to the question of the expense of how many others that still have that lingering trauma. I think one narrative that we have heard here with this bill as well is again the false narrative of deflection before jail. And they're saying even though we have off-ramps, we have deflection. Part of this bill, what it does is in the conditional discharge, the defendant can be referred to probation for 1 year, and then defendant is evaluated and referred to treatment. And the big question here is the appropriate level of treatment even available? And it isn't. And so that's the false narrative that we have there. Because really what the type of treatment that we need for high acuity users and for fentanyl, which is what we're dealing right now, the crisis, it's in inpatient treatment services, culturally, linguistically specific treatment services. And those are not there. So then that forces the person to basically the court say, fine then, since we don't have inpatient treatment services, let's put you in outpatient treatment services. And so we don't provide them the services that they require. And then they have to do these treatment services, they have to do these classes, they go out in the day, and then at night they have to come back to the same streets that put them there in the first place. They have to go through the same cold. They were self-medicating to not feel that, and they have to go back. And then if they don't succeed in the program, we punish them. And so that's the fallacy in this proposal as well. Like it's to use the words of an 11-year-old that lobbied with us, it's mind-boggling, right? That if we, for example, want treatment services for a Hispanic Latina woman, we have to send them to California because we don't have that here in Oregon. And so again, that funding, the resources, they're all not there. And all of these narratives are based on services that are not there, that are non-existent.
Can I just uplift one thing that Jay said earlier about accountability and punishment? Because every time I hear accountability, I'm just going to lose my shit. I think white supremacy, the structures of power, they want to believe that folks in a lot of pain, suffering from substance use disorder, are making specific decisions. And I think we all know that they're not. And it drives me just up a wall because it's them who should be held accountable. It's their, like, what they've set up as far as, housing systems and like how they cut people out of healthcare systems. And it's like the systems that they've inherited and that they continue to set up are driving people to the situation. And then they just try to, I guess, absolve themselves of any responsibility or looking at themselves by being like, nope, you're making a really bad decision and we need to help you make the right decision. So I just want to say, like, there's some things that have been repeated over and over again, like lack of law enforcement tools, that I swear the more I'm in these conversations and like these hearings, I just kind of lose it each time internally inside.
I can add one more quick thing. Well, first of all, I think it was actually Danita that brought up the accountability thing.
Sorry.
But yeah, just to kind of piggyback off that, I was thinking about how people will have this contradicting story, and they'll be saying the opposite thing in one sentence or like in one testimony, in one paragraph, where they're like, on the one hand, people need accountability. There needs to be consequences. How many times do we hear that? And then, well, it's like, okay, well then let them get treatment. Well, they don't have control. Well, they can't make decisions in that state. And so what is it? Are they bad and need to be punished? Or do they have no control? Because it can't be both. But people will say in literally the same sentence, we need accountability, we need consequences, and they can't control themselves. They can't do anything about this. So, and they don't see the contradiction, which is wild to me.
Yes, there were definitely whiplash moments during the same sentence and in the same testimonies. And then I was like, are you for, are you against? I don't understand. And I think that it really just does highlight that there definitely is a pathway to healing. And I think that there are folks out there that just are so stuck in the status quo, which unfortunately is white supremacy and that culture. And so as we're getting towards the end of this panel, I would like us to think about how we can move towards a world without criminalization of drugs and the people who use them. So what do those restorative and transformative justice models for implementation look like for you?
I'm happy to lead us off with something a little cheesy, and then we can go from there. The safest communities are the ones that are the most invested in, right? So this money, the resources that we're putting into this carceral system, we could actually be putting into building resilient communities. We could be eradicating poverty. We can ensure the fact that folks have housing. People could get access to medical quality, good medical care that actually meets the needs of the individuals and in the neighborhoods that they're in. Like these are all things that we could do that would make such a significant difference in our livability, which is also a term that they keep using, and I think they're using it out of pocket, out of context. There's real investments we can make for livability.
Yeah, I would thank you, Danita, for that. I think we also have to understand, like, what do we need to invest in, right? Like, we need to understand addiction. Why does it even exist? And it's what are the circumstances that lead people to the substance use disorder? And it's factors like poverty, like trauma, like abuse. Um, I think this is where we can use some of those mechanics of the restorative justice to help people through these and really look at, again, if we're looking at the root causes, that's what we need. That's exactly what Danita is saying. This is what we invest in: the housing, the treatment services, programs like Portland Street Response, where law enforcement is not even there. You have people that are treating substance use disorder as a healthcare issue, and people come out and support you. Like, if I make a 911 call, why do I need the firefighters, the police, like all of these things? Like, such a bad use of our tax dollars. And I might just be having a bad crisis, and none of those are going to be able to support me. So looking at those root causes and the factors that lead us there.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that's really important is obviously transformative justice, and Danita was sort of touching on this sort of libertarian approach to addressing violence, where we're really wanting to transform the society and transform the conditions in which violence is reproduced, right? In order to stop violence before it happens. Like, there's a saying that in violence prevention that says, once the gun or the bullet leaves the barrel, it's already too late. You can't prevent violence that's already happened, right? All you can do is try to reduce adverse childhood experiences, try to increase the social determinants of health. Like, that is actually how you prevent violence, but it's also how you prevent addiction and all these other things as well that are harming our society. And so another thing I think is really important is the term or the word accountability has come up so much. And I just think it's really important that people realize that accountability is not something you can force onto people. Accountability is something that you can only take willingly. You can't force anybody else to be accountable. That's not accountability. What they're actually talking about is punishment. They're talking about alienation. They're talking about state violence. That is not accountability at all, like in the slightest. And another thing in terms of transformative justice, there's this idea that like individual justice and collective liberation are equally important. They're mutually supportive and they're fundamentally intertwined. So, we can achieve you can't achieve one without the other. You need both. And, transformative justice system is not just trying to bring justice between individuals. It's trying to bring the collective liberation so we all can experience justice and the conditions that we need in order to thrive.
I think one more thing that I would throw out is that, Imagine Black is an abolitionist organization. I believe in actually a transformative process of abolition, but not just in shrinking the carceral system, not just in the state, but part of the process that I'm going through is really thinking about what that means internally and also challenging the things that I carry with me growing up in a white supremacist society that views accountability and punishment as the same thing, and really unpacking that and holding compassion in a way that before this journey I was not allowed to do. And when I'm able to center compassion and view people through a lens of humanity, wow, the things that, I'm capable of that honestly 10 years ago, 15 years ago, Danita wouldn't have been capable of. When I'm thinking about the kinds of investments, there's the investments we need from the state into our communities, but there's also the investments that we need with each other and building community with one another and recognizing that, especially in the realm of public safety, we keep us safe. That's the way it's always been. We keep us safe. And really honing that in and building the infrastructure within our communities for that to be a fundamental truth.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for those answers. On Tuesday, I was on a panel with Steve Phillips, who wrote How We Win the Civil War. And one of my favorite quotes in it, as he's talking about how King had simply asked, "Can we all get along?" Right? And which is connected to Fannie Lou Hamer, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go deep into it. You should read the book though. But essentially, they're asking the Summit America to its highest and best self and challenge the country to write a new social contract, a contract infused with morality, ethics, and love. And that just centers us as humans first. And talking about what you were talking about, Danita, of we've always protected ourselves, and honestly needing to hop right back into that and strengthen it is really hitting home right now. So I really appreciate that, and I think that is a beacon of critical hope that we need in this moment. So thank you for that. This last question, folks want to touch on it. There are a lot of people here who care about proven solutions to addiction. Proven solutions. So where do we as community members have the power to affect change?
All right, I'll jump in. Try not to go first, try not to talk too much. Well, there's a number of ways. I guess it really depends on what is like your thing, because well, first of all, I'll say that I think that a lesson learned in terms of the Measure 110 stuff is to really like stay on it and to really be protecting our wins. And so as this, HB 4002 looks like it's going to be passed, we have to stay vigilant. We have to do to them what they did to us. Like, as soon as we see the crime rates go up, as soon as we see death rates go up, publicizing all those things and just spreading the word and letting everyone know that this new change is failing and just being on them from day one. Like, so what that might mean is, following all of these wonderful folks on Instagram, Facebook, all these things. And as we're amplifying things, maybe you're amplifying things to your friends and family too. This could also be, not to do shameless plug, but I'm going to do shameless plug. Unite Oregon has a decriminalization action team, which people can join. Basically, it's for folks that are really passionate about this kind of stuff and want to stay involved. Throw it in the chat right there. So that's another way for people to get involved. And, say politics is not your thing, you're not really into that. There's also the sort of public service side of that, where you can do peer counseling. They need so many drug and alcohol counselors. In fact, if people are looking for a career change that is like a steady career, go into drug and alcohol counseling. Like a PCC has a lot of scholarships for that kind of thing. There's a huge demand for it. You can also volunteer with Lines for Life. I'm a volunteer at Lines for Life. And one of the hotlines that we answer is the alcohol and drug helpline. And so you're talking to people directly about what their options are in the region. Most of the time, there's not a lot of options, but you're really, connecting to individuals that are struggling through substance use disorder. And I think that creates a sense of empathy. And so, maybe if you're not into the politics thing, then, maybe going into the more social service side of it. But I think, the easiest thing to do is just follow us. Unite has I think it's just at Unite Oregon. Follow everyone else, as we're publicizing things, help us signal boost and get messages out.
All of that. And we know that elections are around the corner, right? We just had a whole lot of folks, and we will tomorrow as well, make some votes that may or may not reflect your values. You should reach out to the folks that are making decisions on behalf of you as a constituent. I think that holding feet to the fire is a very real thing. We cannot allow decision makers to be insulated from the decisions that they make. And they are also saying there's a repeated theme that's happening. It's like, I'm hearing from Oregonians when I was on this police ride along, right? And so, like, we need to make sure that they're actually hearing from Oregonians and not folks that are in the middle of an engagement with an officer or through a carceral system. We also need to make sure that we are participating at very least in local elections, and that we are voting with our conscience and utilizing our power. And there are a lot of really great orgs to help with that. Next Step being one of them. Imagine Black is here. We've got Unite that's here. It is a great passion of mine. And when it comes down to the way that this money that is being poured into our carceral systems is going to be spent, your county commissioners are going to have a big piece of that pie, and are going to be a part of the decision-making body because of the sheriffs, right? So we really need to engage in these local level elections, know who's going to be in this space, and make sure that we are holding them accountable to every promise that they are making. If Crump is going to say that there is not going to be racial disparities and that he himself is going to ensure that that is not going to happen, then he needs to hear from us.
So I'll start by saying that the ACLU of Oregon is nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. So that's a tool to many. We also don't have social services, direct services. So I appreciate Jay mentioning some of those. But we do have education programs, right? And that's a big tool for us. We're obviously big believers in true and fair democracy and trying to seek that. We don't believe it's been realized, so we're working for that. And this session, the ACLU of Oregon and more than 27,000 members that we have across Oregon really sent thousands. Like, we took action, and thousands of our members, and including myself, engaged in our democracy, right? We called, we emailed, we submitted testimony, we showed up in person. We asked for the real solutions, including everything I've said: more treatment, housing, prevention programs, community revitalization efforts, and those non-police mobile crisis responses like the Portland Street response. We drafted a list in coalition work of accountability measures that could be implemented within the bill itself. And so all of that had an impact. Despite the bill that we're seeing pass through, it did have an impact. So I think I don't want people to lose to lose hope, because there is hope, and there's ways to get engaged And it's something that we will be following closely in really closely. Like its session just ends in a few weeks, but really this is right after we're right on it again.
Yeah, this is going to be a continuous fight. And I am so glad to be in it with you all. I think the only thing that I would add on to that is invest in your community, right? So choose like a few of the people around you and make sure that they know the real facts about this, right? There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think this peer-to-peer organizing and changing the culture to not be fear-based within the state is going to help the culture of our state so much, so that when we do win decriminalization again, we can protect it. Um, and that is something that's so tangible. Like you go to dinner with your friends, great, talk about it, right? In any of these moments. So that would be one of the things that I would add. And I think that now we have some time for some audience questions. So I will invite my team back to lead us in that.
Yes, a lot of these questions were answered with this last question and just throughout all of the rich responses y'all gave. So I'll try and pick a couple that maybe y'all can expand on. The first one is, how do we influence organizations to withhold endorsements and money from these yahoos? I really appreciated the way that was written.
So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. One of those is, if you have a political home, if there's a space, an organization that you find yourself in deep alignment with, be engaged in that organization. If that's Next Up, if that's Imagine Black, if that's Unite, make sure that your engagement also includes you elevating the fact that, hey, I'm not for endorsing this individual. I'm not for putting money into the pocket of a person that's targeting Black and brown communities. I would also argue that there's a lot of other orgs out there that also do endorsements that might be a part of what could be considered progressive. Reach out to them. Like, it's not going to hurt to send them an email and just be like, this happened. I don't think that this is aligned with your values. And as a person that is engaging with your organization, I am asking you to not do this, and name the people specifically and what it is that they did. As a person that fields those kinds of emails, I can say that is incredibly moving. And it also is just good to know that folks are engaged and they're paying attention to what's going on.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what is the plan to reduce harm and help people going forward with this new law? Will it look more like changing facets of this new law, or is it to repeal?
This one's kind of tough because I'm not exactly sure what is like the next step in a lot of ways. It feels like, because it's an election year and all of these politicians are trying to save their butt, like they're going to push this through, they're going to like hammer it through. And then, in the election year, things are going to change. Hopefully, there'll be shifts in who's in power. And I think one thing that we can really do is make it clear to at least the new folks coming in that this is a really big issue for us, and we're going to be continuing to fight this. Like, just be on them. Like, I think about how I'm in City Hall all the time, and the suburban reactionaries are there every week. Every week, one of them has, they do these at the beginning of every city council meeting. They have these communications. Anyone could sign up, like you or me could sign up, and you get 3 minutes to talk about whatever topic you want. One of those people is going to be like, the livability of downtown people are doing drugs out and whatever. And so I think that we probably need to start doing that, like now, like start annoying the crap out of them. And so that's sort of where my mind is going. Like, it seems like this thing is going to go through, at least for the time being, but we're sort of building for the long term, you know, building for the future. And maybe it won't be able to be overturned in like the next year, but maybe in the next couple years, once we have some new folks in, once, you know, we've hounded them into submission, you know, that's kind of where my head's at.
I love that so much. I totally lost what I was going to say, so I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Jessica and try to find that thought again.
Happens to me all the time, Danita. I think that we should also expect that when I mentioned the fiscal and the money, we should expect that the funding for Measure 110 to be attacked in the near future. Like we didn't see a lot of that this session, mainly because a lot of those funds had already actually been contracted out. Not that it was all out and implemented, but it was contracted out. So there was nothing to attack because there was no money left in that pot of money, right? But we should see that law enforcement and several others are going to come back and they're going to want that money. So it's something that we should be looking out for. We should be looking out for the real fiscal of what this revamping of the criminal system is going to look like as well. So, and being able to compare the two, there is data tracking in the bill in some respects to it. And we have heard commitment from legislators that they will be following closely. So we should hold them to it as well. Did you remember, Danita?
I did. It came back and then I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it again. You know, the reality is, and I think Jessica just kind of touched on this too, we're not done. This is going to be something that comes back over and over and over again. And in fact, were things that we shared with lawmakers while we were trying to negotiate this bill, right? It was like, you're not going to solve it now. We are going to be back in 15 months. We're going to be back having the same conversations. The reality is, it was like a mighty few. We did a really good job. I am so thankful and proud that I had the opportunity to work with these amazing people on this incredibly challenging, complex, emotional, hard bill. But we need more people. We can't do this on our own. We need constituents that are going to show up. We need folks that are going to not only email, but call. I saw that comment in there that you call them. And if you get the opportunity to go to an in-district meeting, you show up in an in-district meeting. I want a group of folks that are so engaged in what's going on that when your legislator sees you, they know who you are by first and last name, because you are going to be that engaged with them, because this isn't going away. We are going to be fighting this for years. And that is a hard reality, but it is what we are going to be facing. And this is the time for us to really think about what we're doing today and how it impacts 6 months from now. And 6 months from now, what we're going to be doing is going to impact a year from now. This is life work.
Hey y'all,
Yeah.
my name is Gabby and I work for Oregon Recovers. I am the project coordinator for the Recovery Network of Oregon. And, you know, I help people who are seeking addiction services, you know, find, you know, what organizations can best help them while feeling seen for the entire state of Oregon. And yeah, I agree with everything that you all have been saying. Like accountability is completely different than punishment, and accountability is a self-imposed thing, and it's not, you know, punishment. You know, accountability, you know, brings self-empowerment, you know, self-freedom, but you know, and then punishment just puts us to a disposition to where we are treated like children. And as an addict in recovery, myself with 444 days today, I you know, I want to help people, you know, feel seen and heard, you know, as they are coming out of their addiction, you know, as they are you know, realizing, you know, whatever type of wellness plan works for them. Because it's not my decision to say like whether that's abstinence derived or whether that is any form of harm reduction, however harm reduction looks to them. That's their choice. And yes, I definitely like we did the advocacy day, through Oregon Recovers, on February 15th, and my legislators do know me. Like I it is important that we are seen and that we are heard, because the thing is that my only experience with law enforcement was riding around as a passenger in my friend's car, and this was when I was newly trans, and yes, I was in my addiction, but I had nothing on me, and I was taken to jail off of a court, missing my court date, for like a traffic ticket, and where I got my wig snatched off, which I felt was my identity at the time, and then put in solitary confinement for 3 days, and I never want that to happen to anyone who is like me, or anyone, period, right? Like I understand that some people feel like it is necessary for them to go to jail. I do not agree, but I mean, that's, I cannot decide for another person what works for them and what doesn't. What I will say is that there are many people who are trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming, like myself, who fall through the cracks, and we just really need to emphasize that we are people too. That humanity, means us too, and Measure 110, more than destroys us too. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gabby, for sharing that. And I think that we have heard so much about like the failures of decriminalization, and so often the narratives of how this, with the small chance that we did have to implement Measure 110, the success that was there for keeping families together, for not incarcerating people, for not continuing this legacy of harming Black and Brown communities, for harming queer and trans people. And so I'd like to open it up to the panelists to just share about where the successes of decriminalization lie, because, this whole legislative session, we've been hearing everything we can be thrown to discredit decriminalization.
I keep going first. But so I think it's important to recognize that in a way, like decriminalization is kind of like a negative piece, you know what I mean? Where like criminalizing people adds a level of violence. So that's why it can be almost hard to quantify, because like we know that criminalization does all these terrible things to people, causes people to lose opportunities, lose their housing, go through, the rotating door, overdose, all of these things. But decriminalization, it's hard to sort of guess or measure how many people we're saving, right? But we are, like, I mean, people do measure that. There is research to back that decriminalization leads to less overdoses, leads to better quality of life. I think of Portugal. You know, Portugal is the only other place that's doing this, and they went from #1 in HIV infections to number like 19 in Europe, almost at the bottom. And it was in like 8 years or something like that. So it's not like an overnight thing, but like the consequences were really drastic. Like they went from #1 in all of these things and all of these categories to almost the bottom of the list, you know? And so we've seen that it's been this amazing success in Portugal, because they really put the time and the resources. They understood that this is not going to be something that is overnight. And that's something we need to understand too, is that there are successes, there is benefits to decriminalization, but it just started happening. Like people just started getting their money like last year, a little bit before last year, you know? So, yeah, I mean, we kind of have to wait to really understand the true magnitude of the benefits, but they are there.
I got hired under decriminalization, so thank you. I mean, yeah, I am a success story for that, so thank you.
If I can add to that, Jay, I think one of the reasons why it's also really difficult to quantify the success of Measure 110, it's not just the short amount of time that we allowed it to exist, but also the convergence of it in the timeline of COVID-19. And so that becomes very difficult because COVID-19 really worsened our unsheltered crisis. And so being unsheltered makes people more vulnerable and it reduces the safety, which can lead to lead or intensify mental illness. And so we're seeing a lot more housing problems. We're seeing a lot more mental issues, concerns happening. The housing crisis began long before Measure 110, but that's what it's being tied to, right? That's some of the myths that we have to deal with. And actually, when we look at drug overdose stats, we've seen that it's increased across the country, not just in Oregon. And so really a research study that was commissioned by the federal CDC found that increase in like those overdose rates in Oregon and Washington are not correlated to decriminalization policies. So in fact, there's 33 states that had higher rates of drug overdose deaths than Oregon. And we can't do the same thing that opposition is doing and say, oh, look, we're lower because of decriminalization, because we don't want to, you know, correlate causation. But it is, that's the difficulty of quantifying the success. And so we find even then a lot of, there are some numbers that I'd be happy to look back around as to what the funding thus far has done on Measure 110 to support individuals in stabilizing, in housing, and in treatment services. I myself have heard from several folks with culturally specific treatment services needs for the Hispanic population. And so a lot of these were funded with Measure 110 funds, right? They were put up with Measure 110 funds. And so I say we don't have any treatment services for Latina Hispanic women, but we were able to do that for some Hispanic men. And so it's the first in the state in Washington County. Can you imagine that? So those are some of the success stories.
Thank you so much. We're right at time. We're a little over. I just want to touch on next steps really quickly. We know that this is moving to the Senate floor for a vote as quickly as possible so that the governor can sign off on it. I would love to hear what each of you and your organizations are doing as next steps, so that people can know how to connect and how to plug in. At Next Step, we know that we're not letting this like representatives who are saying like we'll be following this closely, like, and still voting yes, like that is not enough. We are letting that inform our endorsement process, who we throw work and support behind. And I want to open up to hear what next steps y'all are taking.
I can hop in. We will be doing some educational conversations, especially around our civic engagement gathering. We've got one that's coming up in the next 2 weeks. We will also be putting up additional information on our app, which is the Black Possibilities app. I'm going to put that in the chat. You can find it in the App Store. There are spaces there for everyone, though we are particularly directed towards Black folks. There are spaces for everybody. We'll continue to put information out so that folks understand exactly what happened. We're able to break it down in more digestible chunks, and provide opportunities for folks to get more engaged or stay engaged. We also have our endorsements coming up, and it's just don't think this is gonna not be a part of it. So real excited about that as well.
I hope someone speaks after me because I feel like I just to change like the tone of what I'm about to say. So there's parts of the bill that will come online in like September. That's the possession of a controlled substance. But there's part of a bill that's going to be effective immediately when the governor signs it. And that has to do with drug delivery. And I think what Danita mentioned before, delivery in certain locations. So within 30 feet of parks, within 500 feet of treatment centers and temporary residence shelters. And we expect like just sweeps of all these areas, and it's going to be like super, super ugly. So I just wanted to let you all know so that you can take care of yourselves, but also like spread the word and take care of, if you help other people, just take care of yourselves, take care of them. It's going to be really, really bad at a very short period of time.
Yeah, Unite has a lot of things going on. We're having a rally on Saturday. I will put in the chat if folks want to go. It would be really amazing. Oops, let me just put it in the chat real quick. Also, there's going to be a sign making party as well, and I'll put in the chat for that. And for the rally, I think it's tomorrow. And then also if folks are needing like a few bucks, like want to make some money, we're doing literature drops next week, and it's paid. It's $22 an hour, so I'll put that in the chat too. Yeah, so that's some of the I also mentioned the action team, the decrim action team earlier. That's another way to get involved as well. Follow us on all the things, etc.
Awesome. So I think I'll close it up just very quickly on next steps. We have our website, and at the bottom of it, you'll see our policy agenda and the places where it says take action. At the bottom, this bill is not done. It still has to go to Senate vote. So your voice can still be heard. We did hear legislators on the floor say, I got this many emails, and this was for, and this was for, and this was against. So your voice can still be heard. It's up for vote probably, if not this week, early next week. And there's a lot of other ways to also get involved as we undo piece by piece this very bad system.
Well, thank you all so much for your time and your wisdom and the work that you do. It's been said multiple times, but this work relies on how we work together. And I'm grateful to be in this work with y'all and to be in this space with everyone here. Yeah, thanks, y'all. We'll be reposting this recording so that you can catch some of this wisdom that has been shared. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And we'll share out some of these resources that were linked in the chat. Thank you so much. Oh, and Isabella wants panelists to stay because she wants a photo. So please, panelists, hang back. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, we can do it now. If you just all want to smile, because I'm like, you are all talking at different times. Okay, I'm gonna count. Wait, let me turn off these captions. All right. Amazing. 1, 2, 3. Oh my gosh. Wonderful. Okay, one more. Okay. 1, 2, 3. After that discussion, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thanks, y'all. I totally forgot that was recording until you said it till the end. I was like, oh, shoot.
Oh well.
It's all brilliant.
It was so good. You're
Yeah.
also smart.